G'day, guys, and welcome to the Round 7 episode of the Captain's Corner, brought to you by the Third Man Up. I'm here with Rossco, and we're here to delve into all the captaincy choices that we have available to you. Firstly, Ross, how are you, mate?
Yeah, good. I've put a lot of thought into this week, so hopefully I can help all of you guys watching nail a really good vice captain or a captain. I think it has been a tricky couple of weeks for picking some captains, especially for me. I haven't quite nailed them over the last couple of weeks, but I think this week could be the week to bounce back with some nice matchups, and hopefully we can find someone to get us off and rolling again.
Nah, that's it, mate. I think more than ever, there's sort of been, even when you've got the smash plays that you think are just, they're a certainty to go off, it just not how it seems. Like last week, Jack Sinclair playing the Bulldogs, a team that's given up points to designated kickers in the past, and Sinclair's had a good history against them as well, and it just doesn't go to plan. So it's really unfortunate in that way. But I think this week it's going to be another tricky week, where if we get that 120 score as your VC, you just lock it in straight away. But let's basically crack straight into it. I think something which we should always be considerate of is the tag. So we can almost think about the players that we want to rule out in essence. So I think the big one, looking at the fixtures with the Saints playing Brisbane, Marcus Windhager, who does he go to? Obviously, the big sort of elephant in the room there would be Lachie Neale. And then the downstream off that is, well, the Doggies midfielders went to work against St Kilda. Can your Dunkleys and your McCluggage types get off the chain there? You've got the Giants playing the Doggies. So who does Bedford go to? Does he go to a similar size type in an Ed Richards, or can he really go around the ground with Marcus Bontempelli? Then at Gold Coast, James Jordan, the tags haven't necessarily been working as effectively as years gone by. Last year, sorry. But he's probably going to go to someone at Gold Coast. Is it the inside bull in Matt Rowell, or is it the outside player in Noah Anderson? So I think those three are the big ones sort of forecasting. Ross, is there anyone, we're going to go through plenty of names here. Is there anyone that you sort of cross out as an option this week based off of either tags or other factors?
I think there's a couple definitely here that I would probably rule out. I think looking here, Rowan Marshall, based on his recent scoring, if you just go up against Brisbane, it's last 10 games, it's a hard matchup, Oscar McInerney against the Rucks. And as you can see, he's scored a 95, a 99, 126 last time out, which is not too bad, but hasn't cracked 70 in his last 3 games. Now, as a Saints supporter, I think he might be a bit underdone. I know he came off a fractured pelvis in the preseason, and he did start the season well, but I think the effects of possibly an interrupted preseason, a lack of fitness might be sort of catching up with him now that his body's been worn out for a few games in a row. I went to watch him in gather round, and he didn't really move anywhere, nearly as well around that small ground even as he normally would. And then last week against the Bulldogs, Tim English is normally a pretty friendly matchup, and Tim English easily got the better of him. So I think there's something not quite right with him there. Probably be avoiding him. Same goes with Lachie Neale. I think Marcus Windhager will go to him, even if he doesn't super clamp him down. His best one in the last 3 is only 114. So I'm not too sure if he'll be able to completely break that tag again. He does struggle. I think he's probably one that I own that I'll definitely be avoiding as well. And then if you scroll down a little bit as well, I think I'm probably going to be avoiding Harry Sheezel. Now, I had him as my captain last week for a disappointing 86. And I just don't really know what his role is. Like, he's sort of playing like hybrid midfield, half forward. He obviously scored that 144 coming off half back, where we know and love him as a scoring machine there last year. But since then, he's gone back to that sort of mid-forward role, and it's just not really conducive to high scoring. He's racking up plenty of possessions, but they don't seem to be the impactful. I know we mentioned it on the potty last night with Zorko, hitting those 40-meter kicks through the center corridor and nailing it straight to a target, those +8 long kicks that are effective to a target. Getting cheap handballs that are inefficient It's just not really the way you want your captain to be scoring. And for that reason, with a tough matchup against Port at Adelaide Oval, probably going to avoid Sheasel as well. What about you, mate?
Yeah, I think bang on right there. I think one thing that may sort of shift my frame of mind on Sheasel is with Sack Fisher out. Like, if we get word that Sheasel will be going back to halfback, it may shift it towards him becoming more of an option. But even then, it's a tough matchup regardless. So I'm not really, I would prefer Sheasel to be able to score 120 and be happy with it. That sort of thing. I think one of the tricky parts for a lot of coaches is that some of the captaincy options that are really good matchups this week are just not in form. So when we think about Clayton Oliver, Christian Petrarca, if you, in their heyday, this is the easiest VC of all time, playing on the Thursday night against Richmond, that sort of thing. So I think those are some of the things which we are, like Rowan Marshall against Brisbane, like they're just not in form at the moment. Otherwise, like Dane Zorka, even 70, 82, 94, playing against St Kilda. Last year, I think the whole comp had him as the VC when they played up at the Gabba against St Kilda there. So something to just consider. What we'll do now is we'll just go through a couple of matchups that we particularly are looking to target. So I think Max Gawn against Richmond, the easiest ruck matchup over the last 5 games, and the second easiest over the last 10 games. That is Tobin and Curvis and Richmond. Max is clearly back in form now. I reckon he was underscored on the weekend as well. Came up super clutch in crunch time for the Ds. He's got a great sort of last 2 games against Richmond, 162 and 174. Playing on Thursday night lights, I think this is going to be huge. So if you've got Max Gawn, I feel like that's a pretty safe play there. I'll just talk about that Collingwood-Essendon matchup there as well. So we got a couple of interesting options there for both sides. So Dacos is obviously the big one there. Now the captain, so he's going to be captaining for the first time on Anzac Day. Huge event for him there. Is it possible that he does get some attention from a Will Setherfield type of really? Setherfield can't run with Dacos, so I'd be confident VC in Dacos in this condition. The pod play here, really, those Darcy Cameron. Now no Sam Draper, no Nick Bryan. So those DFS ease of matchup data is all a bit sort of scuffed because that's playing that 2-ruck setup, and now you get a matchup with Todd Goldstein. You really don't know how he's going to play. So I think Darcy Cameron, as one of the best rucks in the league, should have a really good matchup here. And if you don't own Max Gawn, but you own Darcy Cameron, a VC fly on Cameron is something I would suggest there. And then on the other hand, the 2 key cog movers for Essendon, Merritt and Martin. We were talking on the potty, mate, about how Collingwood like to clog up the corridor. I think that may sort of affect the scoring ceilings of Merritt and Martin, who do like to take those risky kicks into the corridor for those effective kicks. So maybe that might be, may have to come down in terms of expectations there. Handball it over to you, mate. What sort of matchups are you looking at elsewhere across the
I think just quickly going on with that Anzac Day game with Collingwood and Essendon, there is in the forecast a bit of possible rain there. I think it's a minimum of 4 millimeters, which does make the game a bit sloppy. But if we end up getting that 25 millimeters maximum forecast, which I know some people in the community are very excited about, owners of Ned Long, owners of Darcy Cameron, then we're looking at David Zaharakis wet levels, similar to that 2009 game. And I don't know how much that really helps these players. It takes away some avenues of scoring, marking, efficient disposal. Like, I think that's something that we need to be wary of. But in terms of other matchups that I'm sort of looking at, the other 2 are probably Port Adelaide versus the Kangaroos at Adelaide Oval. I think Rosie playing off halfback and Butters playing in the midfield. I know they're just sort of average matchups on paper there in terms of DFS, but North Melbourne, like, being frankly honest, have been putrid the last couple of weeks. Like, they lost by 90 to Carlton, and then the week before that, they got smacked as well, I believe, by the Swans, was it? Yeah. So regardless of what those numbers say, they've been absolutely putrid. Port Adelaide seem to have found a bit of a mojo since gather round. They've beaten the Hawks, they've beaten the Swans to sort of up their teams. And they are the exact kind of team, sorry if you support Port Adelaide and you're watching this video, but they do love to just beat up on lesser teams at Adelaide Oval. And I think that bodes well for Rosie and Butters. Not so sure about trusting Horn Francis, as he has been a little bit up and down. But I'd say Rosie off halfback and Butters are two that you should definitely be looking to target. And then the last game of the round as well, Hawthorn versus the West Coast Eagles. Now, I'll get to my man a little bit later on, but obviously West Coast are a fairly easy matchup. You know, they're the easiest matchup for inside mids there, last 5 and last 10. I own Jai Newcomb, and I'm genuinely considering popping my captaincy on him this week. But, you know, there's other options. You know, if you've got like a Carl Amon, a Lloyd Meek, I don't know if there's anyone else who would be sort of owned by super coaches out there. Who's that?
Yeah, James Sicily as an enigma.
Yeah, James Sicily. You know, if you're looking for a last-minute punt, then maybe one of these Hawks boys worth the Eagles could be your go. That again, being said, Bailey Smith versus Carlton could be a bit of a safer one. But if you're really willing to roll the dice, then Hawthorn versus the Eagles at Marvel Stadium, bouncing back off a loss against the Cats, I think it's a no-brainer that, you know, if you haven't nailed something earlier, then you could genuinely go for a midfielder or a designated kicker against the Eagles.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think Jai Newcomb is one of those players where you sort of have him now as an option, Rossco, for like he is a pod, but now you have him as a genuine captaincy option that a lot of the comp don't own. So when other coaches are scrambling to try get that 120, I feel like in this matchup, Newcomb's floor should theoretically be 120. And so in that way, you may be looking for a higher upside VC, knowing that you might have that safety net off the Newcomb stain hanging back there. I guess when we look at some other sort of matchups, that Carlton-Geelong game is really interesting for mine. Yes, Carlton are supposedly an easy matchup for midfielders. It's just that we took 4 weeks of the season basically to get into it. Like the ball movement wasn't there. And yes, we've only bet up West Coast and North Melbourne, but it's clear to see that the game style has somewhat changed a little bit. With regards to Bailey Smith playing at the MCG, he was a matchup I was looking at before that Hawks game, thinking against Carlton, he's going to run rings around us. Like he's getting from contest to contest so well. And if the game is a high transition game, that could be a possibility. The only thing that I'm a bit wary of is that Carlton games typically become a bit stoppage friendly. We play, I think they did an analysis on First Crack a couple of weeks ago that Carlton is actually the best at preventing ball movement from D50 to forward 50, which is basically what Bailey Smith's whole MO is. So from that perspective, I think that Smith may get that sort of low hundreds sort of marker. And so that's why I'm sort of a bit hesitant going that way. But if you're a George Hewitt owner, that's where I think like very similar to Jai Newcomb, the form that he is in, you just don't back away from that. When you've got a play like that, yes, it's a bit scary having a pod, putting the captaincy on them, because if they don't score well, you've lost the pod and you've lost your captaincy, but it can also go the other way there. One of the other sort of games that I'm very fascinated in is this Fremantle Adelaide game.
Yeah.
Given that now Fremantle are coming off a very bad loss against Melbourne. We saw Andy Brayshaw do all he can to will his team over the line. I think this is where my VC will go personally, like knowing that they have to bounce back. Now, Adelaide isn't an easy matchup by any means. I just don't think that he's going to cop any attention playing back at Optus Stadium. Even with Caleb Strong, this could be one of the first games that he goes tag-free. Unless James Peatling is back this week from his sling tackle, but that's just one to monitor there. But I feel confident in Andy Brayshaw. And we saw what Lockie Whitfield did at Adelaide Oval. Against Adelaide. Could we see possibly Jordan Clark replicate that? On the flip side, Fremantle is supposedly the easier matchup for those midfielders. So Rankin and Dawson, this could be a tag-free game, and that could be really beneficial. I know Rossco, as a Jordan Dawson owner, that's what you want to hear. But also, you like to get his kicking boots out as well.
Yes, 100%.
All right, so I think we've basically covered all the matchups. Very quickly on Tristan Cherry. Yes, he looks back in form, and yes, he looks free of that hamstring issue now. The only concern is that Jordan Sweet has been very restrictive to opposition ruckman this year, but Tristan Cherry does have that 119 against him last year that way. But I just don't know. North is just a team that, if they get pumped, what's Cherry realistically got as a ceiling there? to consider.
Well, they got 144 last week.
Well, he did, but it was like TDK, not necessarily the most restrictive ruck, but
No.
I was actually considering Cherry as a VC option. I just didn't want to go there last week with the hamstring sort of concern, but it was said just before the game that he had trained fully throughout the week. So I think if he trained fully throughout the week last week, he should train fully throughout the week this week. He's a safe captaincy option. I think he should get to that 120 marker, but I don't know. It's just captaining a North play at the moment feels like a very high level of trepidation, especially in a game where they may get smacked by Port Adelaide.
Yeah.
Let's go then into your top three VC and top three VC options, mate. So we'll start off with you. Well, we've got the same VC option there. Max Gawn, I think it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah. I think if you own him, coming up against Dan Curvis, who is no slouch, but he's just not restrictive. And I just think it's a recipe where, he should go very, very, very well. But that's why you've got your VC on him. The ceiling could be anything there, 174 and 162. But then it's also nice to have the fullback option if he doesn't go well. But in the form that he's in, playing against Richmond, where the game could honestly go either way. And I think that kind of helps as well, where, perhaps Richmond do not get flogged by Melbourne, which I think can help keep the game close and keep it contested. I just think Gawn, as you'll obviously agree, should be the number one VC option this week.
Yeah. I think that he'll be the highest score of the round. Like, obviously, it's easy to say that because you don't consider the variation. Based off the matchup, he should be the highest score of the round. You've got Daicos at 2. I've got him at 3. I think this sort of plays into the fact of the matter is, like, again, these kinds of players like Daicos merit, they stand up in the big games. So even if they do cop the attention a little bit, they get that shadow around the ground. They're still up for the fight. A goal in crunch time, again, with the rain, you get those ground ball gets, the contested ground ball gets. Yes, there may be less marks, but we've seen with Daicos this year that he's got the tackling edge to him as well. I think that from that perspective, another safe pick. If you've got him, you can VC him with safety, knowing that even if he does get tagged to a low 100 sort of score, that you have another bite of the cherry. But Ross, you've got him at 2, ahead of sort of the likes of I've got McCluggage, you've got Brayshaw. What's the rationale there?
Yeah, look, I just think it's a big game factor. As you say, I don't actually think he's taggable. There's always been these big queries about whether he's taggable. And I know in round 1 he had his colours lowered a bit, but I think he was also coming off the plantar fasciitis. He said it himself in an interview after the game. He was cramping in the third quarter. He just wasn't fit enough. Now I think he's adjusted himself into this season. He's beaten Berry, who's normally one of the better taggers in the comp. And he just made him look like a complete fool. Now, I don't think Essendon have anyone that can go with him. Anzac Day, big stage. I can just see him running riot. And the matchup's obviously not as friendly in terms of DFS as Gawn's is, which is why I've popped him second. But I can still see a really nice score coming from Nick Daicos. And then in terms of third, I've popped Andrew Brayshaw in there. He was one that I didn't necessarily overly like the matchup. I know the Crows are 8th there in the last 10 for inside mids. But I think we sort of touched on it. The form that he's in, he really loves playing at Optus Stadium, 131, 105, his last 2 games there. And his last 3, 135, 155, and 120, which arguably, in a tough time for finding VC options, if you have your VC on him, you'd probably take any of those 3 scores there. I just think playing at Optus and, playing against not the hardest matchup in the Crows, if you didn't have Gawn or Daicos, but you had Brayshaw, I would be more than happy to have it on him too.
Yeah. Awesome there, mate. And with McCluggage, the reason why I've gone there is that with near likely to get the tag, it's been successful in the past. Last year with Windy, it's so hard. And you, Ross, as a Saints fan, you can probably testify this. Obviously, is like you just never know what Saints team's going to rock up. Like you obviously look like the Harlem Globetrotters some games, but then you look like Port Adelaide that lost to the bye sort of thing. Like that's the spectrum of performances really. So McCluggage, if this is a big if, and if St Kilda put up what they put up last week against the Doggies, McCluggage is the type that can break apart a game against the Saints. I think that's where I've got the confidence there that he's not the one that will get tagged. But obviously, if he gets tagged, then Neil will probably be the one that goes well. And it'll be really interesting to see. I guess one thing that I just want to add on the Nick Dacos discussion here is that Jared Berry went to him after halftime when the damage was already done. They were down 90 points. And it almost feels like every week the coach comes in and says, oh, we'll put attention into Dacos. We'll have a couple of random stoppages, but it's a lot harder to do than say. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Yes, Setherfield is the natural type of stoppages, but it really doesn't have the tank to go with Dacos around the ground. So
yeah,
something to keep in mind.
2 games in 3 years, Will Setterfield. If you're relying on him as your tagger, I wouldn't be worrying about it for Dacos.
And then when we go over to the captaincy options, mate, when consensus with their number 1 captain, Sack Butters, obviously North Melbourne playing without a tagger, Adelaide at home against North Melbourne, it feels like a really safe and easy VC to see. If you've got Gawn and Butters, that's super easy this week, I reckon, on those two. And then I guess not much really to add except for the fact he's come out basically after his injury and he's looked dynamite. He just had so much to that Port Adelaide midfield, and it just goes to show the difference that one player can make. And I reckon they'll continue this week as well. Very similar again. You've gone with Matt Rowell at 2. I've gone Matt Rowell at 3. Explain why I think Matt Rowell's a good option this week, mate.
Yeah, I just think that obviously we know what form he's in. He's in quite good form. 130 and 126 in his last 2 rounds, which is quite nice. Averages 121.3 in his last 3 against Sydney. I was surprised to see that his average at People First is so low. I thought that was quite unsurprising because I've always sort of had my thought that the Gold Coast Suns are like flat track bullies. They always win at home, that sort of thing. But I think, I'm one that's always kind of been wary of Matt Rowell. I brought him in last year and he sort of burned me a bit. But I think this year, like the Suns, while they lost to the Tigers, they look to have a sort of more well-defined midfield unit. Like I think Anderson's improved. I think Miller has improved. Flanders hasn't necessarily improved, but he's doing a job, I suppose. Humphrey's sort of providing a cog, and that's sort of helping like Rowell and Anderson get off the chain a little bit. And I think, personally for me, James Jordan will probably go to Anderson. I could be wrong, but I think that seems to me the more likely option. Yeah. And that leaves Rowell to do the bulk of the scoring against the Sydney midfield, which is undermanned. And they're also a pretty decent matchup in terms of DFS. So that's why I had him at 2. I'd be curious to see why you had him at 3, but I can sort of see why based on the man you have there at number 2.
Yeah, so I've got George Hewitt at 2 with Rowell. The 74, it's a bit deceiving because you're like, we're into round 7 now and Gold Coast have played 1 game at home. Like, they've only played 1 game at home, the 74 for Rowell. So the other 2 games were at the back end of last season. But in the other 4 games this year that they played, Rowell's gone 137, 136, 126, 130, which are all scores you would take as your VC every day of the week, really. So I've got him in my top 3, but I've got George Hewitt this mainly due to the form, but also due to the fact that I think in a game where it should be, I can see it being high stoppage, but at the same time, I can see it being transition. But we've seen with George Hewitt, he's not simply a stoppage guy this year. Like he's got that outside game a little bit now as well, which is why he's able to score the 171, 132, 125. I know a couple of weeks ago, probably before the Collingwood game, I sort of messaged you, mate, and was like, what do you think of George Hewitt as a shout? And he's just gone gangbusters since. So yeah, good shout. Unfortunately, don't have him in the side, but yeah, if you've got these players, but I think this is where the tricky part is. You've got Jack Sinclair. You reckon he'll bounce back at your number 3?
Yeah, I don't actually have Sinclair, but I do think he'll bounce back as a Saints supporter. Obviously, he's in good form against the Lions, good form at Marvel. His last 3 scores don't look all that appealing, but I think there is a bit of an explanation there. We got pumped by the Dogs. Hard for any of our players to score. They were all well under form. 108 at Norwood Oval, which was quite a heroic effort almost on that small oval. As we know, the designated kickers really struggle to score there. And the fact that he was able to grind out a 108, where I think at halftime he was on like a 30 or something like that, showed that he's still able to put on, 70 points in a half. And then 118, we played against Port Adelaide, and, that was a tricky game. It was very tight, close. He wasn't able to really get off the chain away from home. And I just think being back at Marvel sort of really suits him. I know we got pumped at Marvel last weekend, and we might get pumped again this weekend, but 162 and 145 before his stinker last weekend. And he's gone above 130 the last 3 times we played the Lions as well. So I think he can go pretty decently. I don't recommend him, obviously, as my first or second. I think there are better options. And I think I'd probably even have him ranked, below my third VC. So he'd be the 6th in line for me if I was looking at putting these 6 players in order of where I think they're going to score. But I still think he could be a handy pick if you own him and you're really desperate for someone, because I know not many people probably have Hewitt. Not many people probably have Butters at his price. So I think Sinclair is a handy enough third pick.
Yeah. And I guess the other one there that you'd probably want to touch on for your sake, mate, is Jai Newcomb, the nuke. He didn't make the top 3, but I guess that's because we have him as our pod captaincy option as well, because he's got a great matchup. It's basically the number 1 mid there. I think he should be totally fine. Well, look, I think that brings us to the end of the Captain's Corner video for round 7. Please let us know down in the comments section who you've got as your VC and C. I think with the sheer lack of options in my side to captain this week, I'll be going Andy Brayshaw into it. Possibly Bailey Smith. Hopefully that Andy B can just get the job done on the Friday night. Rossco, you will be going.
It's actually still dependent at the moment, up in the air. I think if I see Matt Carroll named on field, and I think he's not going to be the sub, he's not going to be out, I will use a boost and I'll trade in Nick Dacos and VC him. But if there's queries over Matt Carroll, I think I'll probably just go down to Flynn, and that'll probably leave me with Nankervis, Sarong. It sounds really bad to say, but my team is sort of lacking a few of these VC options at the moment. In terms of the Sunday, I'd probably be looking at Bailey Smith or Jai Newcomb to jump on for me, I think.
Sounds good, mate. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Hopefully all goes well and we can see some green arrows come weekend's end. Hope you guys all have a great weekend and hope your SuperCoach side goes well, especially picking a captain. We'll stay tuned for the round 8 episode of the Captain's Corner next week. Cheers, guys.
Good luck, everyone. Good luck.